everybody! We are live! Yay! Thank you for joining us tonight. This is Constance from Mysterious Galaxy, and I am very pleased to introduce tonight. We have Victoria Ying in conversation with Lily Williams, and we are here to celebrate City of Secrets as well as I Kissed Alice. So I'm going to go ahead and let them take it away. You are in amazing hands for a super fun event tonight. And make sure too that if you have any questions that you put them in the comment section down below, because they will be answering them after their discussion. And also too, if you would like to purchase these books, I will have the link pinned in the comment section for you. And you can also get book plates for them as well. All of the info for that will be on the website for you. But have an amazing event, guys. Bye.
Okay, so I want to take it off by giving a major congratulations to Victoria Ying, which is why we're all here to hear Victoria Ying talk about City of Secrets. So I'm going to let Victoria introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Victoria Ying. I am the author and illustrator of City of Secrets, out today, along with I Kissed Alice, which is also out today. I have a background in animation and began my graphic novel career, and this is my very first debut graphic novel.
Awesome. We're so excited, Vicki. I read this book for the first time last week, and it was a thrilling adventure. So my name's Lily, for those wondering, for the In Conversation With piece. My name's Lily Williams. I'm an author and illustrator of the Animals Disappeared picture book series and the recent Go With The Flow, which is a middle grade graphic novel. And Vicki and I actually worked at Sony Pictures Animation together. We shared a cubicle and we got to be good friends. And then we both ended up transitioning into comics and a book career at the same time. So Vicki and I have sort of charted this path together with each other. And it's really awesome to finally be at the point where we're celebrating Vicki's book that I have heard about for years. So with that, I want to do a little introduction on City of Secrets, which I'm sure Vicki can do. I know Vicki can do a much better job than me, but I'm going to just introduce you how my takeaway from it. City of Secrets is a fantasy, sci-fi, steampunk-inspired action novel centered around an orphan boy and a wealthy girl whose worlds collide when they realize their city is full of undiscovered and untold histories. This thrilling action adventure will have you wanting more every second and wondering how such a magnificent world could exist. The first in its series, City of Secrets, will leave you wanting more. So Vicki, I don't know if you want to add to that. It's a middle grade graphic novel, right?
Yep. I mean, I think that was really great. I love the way that you described it. It's exactly that. There's action adventure. There's a lot of fun things going on. It's high flying action, and it was a challenging book because there's so much movement in it. But I'm really excited with how it got finished, and and the response it's getting so far.
Awesome. Has anyone said anything that really has popped out to you?
I mean, Molly Ostertag compared it to Ghibli movies, which is the biggest compliment, because that was definitely one of my big influences going into this. I wanted it to feel like Miyazaki's Castle in the Sky. I'm very influenced by his work, and even just the idea of writing and illustrating my own graphic novels, a lot of that did come from Miyazaki. So having someone see through you into your influences can be really cool.
That's so awesome. I definitely would say I agree. I saw her quote after I had read the book, and I totally agreed with it, because it is, for those who have yet to read it, I mean, it came out today, so I'm guessing that's most of you. The world turning in it, I don't even know how to describe it. It's there's buildings that turn, and the kids just get wrapped up in this literal world that's moving around them, and not just the hustle and bustle of a city. It's the world is actually twisting and turning around them, and following that kind of blew my mind, especially because I do more realistic fiction. And then reading this, I was just thinking, how did you illustrate that? So how did you illustrate that?
I mean, a big part of that is trying to use the tools of graphic novels, and the other part of it is the power of suggestion, where I just have characters say things like, "Oh wow, that's moving," and I hope that you also buy that.
That's amazing. So okay, to back up, Vicky, we met at Sony Animation when we were both working on Medusa, which has not come out, but is I guess kind of like an action musical about Medusa, and we shared a cube, which at Sony was like very dark.
Yeah.
In a dark room, so we got to talking about all sorts of things. And one of those things, which maybe people would be surprised to find out about because your book is so sci-fi, is we are so into Pride and Prejudice. So what were some of your influences when working on this book that you maybe have influenced you in other ways too?
Oh yeah. I mean, I mentioned Miyazaki and Castle in the Sky. That was a huge influence. Actually, like writing this book, the whole process was born out of a dream that I had one night. Like, I actually don't dream as myself, probably like half the time. And I thought this was really weird, but I polled Twitter, and apparently, like, a lot of people also don't dream as themselves. So I had this dream about these two kids who are running away from an assassin, and there was a secret safe inside of a building. And then from there, I just kind of tried to work backwards and try to figure out who were they, what was in here, why is the assassin trying to kill them, and that's how I built this story. In terms of influences, like, I really fell out of reading fiction for a long time after college, which I think is pretty normal because, like, once you stop being forced to read, you either are a reader or you're not. And for me, like, I was not a big person who read for pleasure. But after I graduated and started working again, I started finding fiction again, and I really loved kind of like the new science fiction and fantasy that was coming out of authors now, people who were like influenced by the same authors that I was when I was a kid. Like, obviously, like Harry Potter is a huge influence on me, and I was able to kind of read these authors who were also influenced by Harry Potter into like doing their own work. So like that was kind of the thing that set me on a path to start writing. um I'm trying to think of other influences too. I think that, like, for this book, because it's like these two kids, I really wanted to make them feel powerful. And like my first big influence in comics was Sailor Moon, which, I think that for like a millennial of a certain age, like we all know what that's like to wake up at 6 a.m. to try to watch Sailor Moon. And for me, like the thing that was most compelling about Sailor Moon was this like power fantasy at its core. It's like these are teenage girls, and they are actually the ones who are saving the world, and they have all this power, which is something that I think kids don't have a lot of when they're the middle grade age. Like, they're really trying to find their own power. So City of Secrets is the type of story that I wanted when I was a kid, to show me that, like, yes, you do have power, you have influence, you can change the world in this like grand fantastical kind of way.
Oh, how interesting. I can see that now, having read that. And I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys, but there's some pretty crazy adults. So yeah, you definitely gave the agency to the kids.
Yeah, and the adults in the story, they mostly stay out of the situations, or they're the villains. So I mean, I think as a kid, that's kind of how you view your parents and adults. Like, that they're these people who have all this power, and like they don't really understand you. So I think that, like, it was kind of it was interesting to me because I have two main villains in the story, and one of them very much represents kind of control and like this kind of school marm kind of character, and then the other one is kind of this agent of chaos. And I wanted to have that feeling of like adults can be dangerous to kids, and to really have those kids still have that power to push back on that.
Yeah, something kids should definitely be aware of.
But it's a fantasy, and like I just wanted it to be fun at its core. At the end, I'm not trying to like teach any big lessons. I just wanted to like have fun, show kids having fun, and show kids like really having that kind of super powered influence.
Yeah. And okay, so if those were like your influences, those are so different from the projects you worked on. Vicky's worked on Frozen and Tangled, and a lot of Disney's big movies, and a bunch of other projects in animation. So how did you realize that you wanted to tell your own stories while working in animation, and how did that line up with what you're working on, or maybe totally didn't, which is why maybe you wanted to do it?
Yeah, so I think that for me, when I went to college, I went to a very strict art school. It was very much about craft and about, being a great artist, but they didn't really teach you anything about storytelling. They would constantly repeat the idea that story is king, but it was a school where they really focused on being a good painter, being a good draftsman, and like those things that make you a really employable employee. But they didn't really teach you how to like start something from the beginning. So, after graduating from there, I was very employable, which was great. But the downside was that like I really didn't understand what it meant to like start a story and to make something from nothing. I understood how to like take a story that someone else made and make something with that, but like to have nothing and then to come up with something, like that was completely foreign to me. In fact, like I just thought I couldn't do it. Like I was like, oh yeah, like that's someone else's job. I'll just be here doing design and all that stuff. And I think that like for me, animation, the biggest thing it taught me about storytelling was that it's not perfect right away. I think that when you see these finished films, everything is like, well, of course it happened this way. That's the best way it could have happened. And they're so polished and they're so finished, and story wise, like they're so tight. You're just like, oh, well, like that's so hard. That's so unachievable. But when I was working in animation, I really got to see how they develop story. And a big part of that was just being wrong and being bad at it. Like, if you got the Into the Spider-Verse DVD, it's a great film. It's literally like perfect in every way. But they do have a version of it where it's a little different. Like they have this alternate universe version. And it's just one small difference where they added in this character that's not in the original. But you can see how much that affected the story. And I think that like for me, going into writing, like and coming from animation in that background, I was allowed to be like, okay, it doesn't have to work right away. I can start something and then go back to it and fix it and like work on it, as opposed to it's just this perfect, beautiful thing that like escapes your brain, So, for me, that was really freeing to be like, oh, right, it doesn't have to be absolutely 100% perfect the very first time you put it out. And you have opportunities to kind of make that better. So, I never thought about it that way, and I never realized that story could be told like that. Like I just kind of thought there are people who are geniuses at story and they can write and they can like make these things, and then there's the rest of us. So, kind of seeing that like, oh, actually, like they're not perfect either, and they actually like take a lot of work to get to that point. That was actually really encouraging for me to be like, oh, well, then you can also make something that's not great, like I can make a bad thing and then make it better. So that was definitely one of the huge lessons that animation taught me.
I feel like that's like the secret to all creative projects. People don't often want to get past the, oh, it's just such garbage phase. And it's like, no, you really have to just tinker and tinker, especially with comics, because they're so long and you're putting in so much work and the story changes at every phase. But no one sees that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely like comics, the production side of things, because like animation, you get to do one small part of it and then other people kind of take over. And that's really cool. Like I love that about animation, is that everyone gets to bring their talents to this project. Modelers get to bring their knowledge, lighters get to bring their knowledge, and then in the end you make this grand, beautiful thing that like no single person could do. But with graphic novels, because you're doing every single piece of it, like you're really with the story for a really long time. So you really do get to like see all of its flaws, and you get to kind of work through all of that stuff too.
Do you think there was any skills that transferred from animation to comics for you?
I mean, I think for me, the basic skills of draftsmanship and color and light and that kind of stuff, like that all obviously transferred over. That's all stuff that I use all the time. But from animation in particular, I think that, aside from like the storytelling aspect of structure and all that stuff, which was really a big thing at Disney, the other thing that I think was really helpful is just kind of seeing storyboards and seeing which moments are important to actually depict, and then which ones you can just kind of move on from because they're not necessarily super important for that scene to read.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for me, it was like, I think the way you said the knowing it's not linear and the whole process is pretty messy, that's definitely something I took from animation. And I also think knowing that this sounds so silly, but knowing people don't know what they're doing. It's like people really walk into a room with a lot of confidence. They don't always know what they're doing. And I felt like in a lot of ways, it's really liberating when you're trying to create stories, because it's like, well, I don't have to know everything now. I can learn it in 5 years as I work on this story.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that like for us when we were working on Medusa, one of the nice things was that our production designer wanted our opinion so much. Like he was really very interested in our point of view and made us feel like we were participants in that project, which was great because I think that's really empowering and important for production artists, because otherwise it can feel kind of like a slog. But you know, working on Medusa, I think that we were really lucky in that sense because our production designer, he was just so generous and so giving, and then you really do get to kind of see like when someone asks you a question, like you're like, what do you think? And then you're like, oh, right, like my opinion is important too. Like I am just as valuable a piece of this project as anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then in graphic novels, you're like most of the project.
Yeah.
Okay, so you and I both did this really crazy thing where we transitioned from animation to publishing at like the same time. So we've sort of been walking with each other through this whole entire process. And for both of us, I think it was like kind of the same stuff that made us want to do it, but a little bit differently because obviously we're different people. So how did you make that transition from animation to publishing?
Yeah, I mean, I had a picture book agent for a long time while I was working in animation, and it was never my like main source of income. It was kind of just like a side project that I had. And so I knew that I was like, okay, well, I've already got like step one, so I can go off and leave. But you know, I think that after leaving and writing this story, which is really different than any of my picture book work and really different than anything that my agent was representing, we ended up like parting ways, which was really hard for me because I felt like, oh my God, like I'm starting from ground zero now. Now I have nothing. But I think that it was actually a real blessing because I really got to find an advocate for my book who really understood it. And I think that that's something that's important when you're transitioning from being a production artist to being someone who's creative from the get-go, you know, like when you're writing, because I think that like we seek approval so much when we're production because we're like, oh, hey, art director, hey, director, here's this thing. Do you like it? Yes or no? If you say no, I'll just redo it. You know, like it's not like your project. It's not from you. What you're doing is you're trying to read their mind. You're trying to be like, oh, okay, I think this is what you want. Let me draw it for you, which is great. And honestly, like that's a great skill to have. And as an experience, it can be really rewarding. But when you're moving into writing your own stuff, then you really don't get that anymore, right? Like the buck stops with you. So knowing yourself and knowing like what you need to do to get your story across and to know your story intimately enough to be like, these are the things I will not compromise on. That was a really big transition for me because I'm so used to taking notes. Like someone would be like, change this. I'd be like, okay, changed, which is actually not the way to do it. I had to like unlearn that part of myself and come to the place where I could be a creator and trust the story for what I wanted to tell. So like that was a really big transition and a tough point for me because I just wasn't sure of my own writing, you know, and that was the other part too. Like I was very insecure about my own writing because I felt like I couldn't do it. Like I'd spent so many years working on the illustration side, and then to come over to this side with so little knowledge and so little experience, I was very, very nervous about it. And, you know, finding that footing and finding that confidence to just tell the story you want to tell is difficult.
Do you think City of Secrets turned out to be that for you?
I do. And I think that, you know, it's funny because I wrote this book actually as a prose novel first. And I wrote it as a prose novel because I knew that it was about a steampunk moving city. And I was like, I'm not drawing that. Being from animation, I know exactly how hard that was going to be. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So I wrote it as a prose novel. So then I could just like hand wave that stuff away. I could be like, oh, it's moving, you know, it's cool. And, you know, I think that for me, like that was a great first draft because then I could show it to people. And then, you know, a lot of people really liked the story. They liked the characters. But then I kept getting this note that people were like, but your descriptions are really, really poor. Like there's just not enough. Like I can't see anything. And I was like, what? I can see it. And of course I could see it because like I'm a visual person, and in my head, like it's so clear. So, you know, I was very resistant to the idea of making a graphic novel. But then when I did, I actually realized I enjoyed drawing the stuff that I thought I was going to hate. And it really filled in those gaps for me in terms of my hesitancy with description. I was like, oh, well, now here's a drawing of it. Now you can see it like I can see it. So that was really like where that came from. And probably like my biggest hurdle was just even accepting that I was going to do a graphic novel, because I think I didn't want to at first. Part of it was like, oh, you know, I'm embracing this writing thing. I'm not an illustrator anymore. Like, I really want to do that side of it. And then kind of coming back to the point of being like, oh, actually, I should embrace my gifts that I've spent so many years cultivating and do both things.
So with that, then, a lot of people, I think you go into comics because you like specifically love comics. Would you say that comics and graphic novels became more of like a vehicle for you to tell the story you wanted to tell?
I mean, yeah, definitely for this project. And, you know, I think that the long winding road to graphic novel for me was definitely something that was born out of my own fears and insecurities. But at the same time, like I actually knew I wanted to do comics since I was really little. When I was like in the 8th grade, I in my yearbook, it says I wanted to be a mangaka, which is like a manga artist, and move to Japan. And now it's like I'm doing half of that, which is great. But like I really moved away from writing because part of it was just that deep insecurity. I was like, I know how to draw. And, you know, I think that like people judge the writing more, especially in films. Like when I started working at Disney, a big part of it was, you know, oh, like the movies look great, but the stories aren't very good. And then as an artist, you can kind of be like, well, that's not my problem. I didn't write it. You know, like you can kind of absolve yourself of that responsibility. I made it look good. So like that was my job. So I did that, right? And obviously like the films I worked on at Disney actually all turned out to be great. So I have no problems there. Like I'm not actually like calling any Disney films out because they turned out great. But, you know, I think that for me, the reason why I went into illustration so hard was that I could kind of, you know, run away from that responsibility of being like, yeah, I wrote it too. So this is like my first book where I actually get to be like, yeah, I get to own that fact. I get to be like, yes, I wrote this and I drew it. So, you know, every single part of it is me. And I think that that's really like the coolest part about being an author and illustrator.
I think that we felt a lot of similar things. Like we went into animation for similar reasons. Like I did the same thing. I wanted to do comics as a kid. And then I was like, well, I don't want to draw Spider-Man. I want to write books about teenage girls. And so I was like, I guess I can't do this. And then, you know, and I didn't do manga. So I was like, well, you know, Peach Girl was the penultimate for me. So I was like,
Peach Girl? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I can't beat that, you know, so I'm gonna go into executing other people's dreams. But then, you know, then you realize you have your own stories and no one else is gonna make them. So you got to get writing.
Yeah. And I mean, for you, like activism is a big part of a lot of your books too. And, you know, I think that's a tough thing when you're working in a big corporate industry to encourage that kind of work. So I think that it made a lot of sense that it's like, oh, well, I'll just do it. So
yeah. For me, for those who don't know my work, it's very like activism based. My graphic novel for middle grade is all about girls who start like a menstrual revolution at their high school. And if you're saying what is a menstrual revolution, it's exactly what you think it is. So yeah, I couldn't do that within that structure, and I needed to be able to tell those stories. And sometimes I think you realize like, oh, I can get back into animation maybe one day, but it has to be through a route in which I tell the story first, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of animation for me is that like my school didn't have a program that taught you how to do storyboarding, and not like in the animation sense, because we had a storyboarding class, but it was very much for feature films, which is very different than animation. Because in animation, you're kind of writing and storyboarding. And like, I didn't know that was a job until I started working at Disney. Like I already had another job. And then I got to like look at other people and be like, wait, that's a job? I could do that? Damn it. So like I was like on the wrong path, and I was like seeing everyone else being like, oh, but
I should have joined you guys when I had
like, oh,
I didn't know.
yeah, I didn't know that was a thing. And I stuck with that, and I think that that was fine. But I definitely know that like that's where that inspiration came from, to be like, oh, you can actually tell the story too. And yeah, and then comics became that vehicle for me.
So you sort of jumped the gun on
Sorry.
like something I was gonna bring up later, but I was gonna say I know that that book was prose before it became a graphic novel, and I was wondering, so you built this world, and it's like it's unlike any world that I've ever seen before. So it is, like you said, a dream that came to life, totally magical. How did you build the world and then take it from prose, an already built world, and put it into a graphic novel format?
Yeah, so like the prose portion of it, I really was focused on character and storytelling. Like those were my really big factors into it, which is why like the world building aspect of it actually was really weak. Like I don't know if I ever showed you a draft of it. Maybe I did. I can't remember. But in my original prose version, the world building wasn't very strong. So the fact that I had the story structure though, and I had the characters, like that was the thing that I knew I could really carry over into the graphic novel version. When it came to building the world, like, I got to kind of lean into some of my training from animation, because I actually built the city from a 3D model, and not a 3D model of a city that I built from nothing, but I actually like use this program called SketchUp, which is a free Google program for which I like to call 3D for idiots, because it's barely a 3D program. It's like just enough. If you have enough logic, you can use it. And all I did was I downloaded other models of clocks, and then I took all the clocks and exploded them, and then took all the pieces of the clocks and then built this like stacked city. And then I zoomed in camera wise and then took a bunch of different shots and then drew over it to make the city. So then, I was using this 3D model so that I could see visually what everything was supposed to be and where it all lined up. So it all matched, like everything from different angles actually like does work. But at the same time, I still cheated, like I used this huge cheat by building this model. And there's a spoiler in the story that I won't quite reveal, but it ended up being extremely helpful for that.
I remember that was the first draft you sent to me. It wasn't actually the prose book. It was the SketchUp like.
Oh yeah.
And you were like, this is what I'm doing, and I was like, oh my god, I'm not gonna learn another program to make a book. I'm not gonna learn more. I'm not gonna do more work to make my book. And I was really blown away by it. But having read it, I don't know how you'd execute it without having made such you would have had to have either done that or made like incredibly elaborate production art to figure out what you were doing.
I mean, it's so funny because our jobs really were production art, like this early viz dev, which is visual development, which is like concepting, right? So you like have characters and environments and you do a bunch of different ideas and you explore all the options. But like in comics, that was not what happened. Like, I think you just don't have the time or the money, it's just not there. Yeah, exactly. Immediately I was just like, well, this is it. We just got to do it now. And so, for me, I didn't get that chance to really explore my characters. I kind of just had to nail them down as quickly as possible. And same with the city and the buildings. If I drew one building that looked good, I was like, that's it. It's in the book now. And, obviously I think it'd be really cool to kind of see this as a film, because I would really love for someone else to take that time, that care into that early portion of the work, the stuff that we were doing, like really explore, really find like the most extreme versions, like the best version of whatever this could be. Whereas like this book, a lot of it is like knee jerk, it's like that first idea that's going in, which is like the thing I tell all my students in my visual development class not to do. I'm like, don't go with your first idea. It's never good. And this entire book is
that's back to trusting yourself, right? Because it's like in Viz Dev, you're like guessing. You're like, okay, I can't trust this idea because it's like it has to be approved by 5 people who have a different vision. But then when you're making your own book, you're like, I guess that's what I want, so that's what's going in there. And also, I only have a short this many days to do this much art. So
yeah, I mean, I think that like writing, because I wrote this book as a NaNoWriMo book, and NaNoWriMo, for those who don't know, is National Novel Writing Month. And you try to write 50,000 words in 30 days, which is really challenging. But one of the things that it teaches you to do is to just move on. Like if you're stuck, deal with it later, you know, like just put something in there that works and then keep going. So, you know, that's kind of what happened in this book too. Like I knew that I couldn't just, if I had to stop for some reason and be like, well, I don't know what this horse carriage looks like I couldn't sit there and, you know, draw all the different versions of horse carriages. I had to just be like, this is it, and keep going. And, you know, that's kind of the only way you can finish these huge projects like this, because this book is 252 pages. And if I got caught up anywhere, then production would have stopped and I would have never hit my deadline. So, you know, obviously there's good and bad to both. And I'm very happy with how the book turned out, because on the one hand, your very first instinct is often the right one, because it's like, oh, this is the idea that your audience is going to understand quickly too. But, you know, there is a part of me that wishes I just had more time to just sit there and, you know, do all the iterations of all the different things, like every doorknob, every window, every little building, you know, but yeah.
You have how many more in this series to do though?
Just one. So
just one?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a duology. So you still have time to like maybe add a detail or two.
No. I'm like knee deep in the second one right now. I am 150 pages done with the inks.
Ooh. And
I still have 100 more to do. So I'm very much like, I'm still in that like production mode, like let's get it done, keep going. Like I pause sometimes, but like, you know, the thing about it is I went back to this book today and I read it from cover to cover just because I wanted to like have that experience. And I was actually pretty happy with all the choices that I made. Like there were ones that I wasn't sure about. Like I was like, I don't know. But then like looking at it now, I'm like, yeah, no, those were the right choices. Those were definitely the ones that worked. So
I definitely agree with you, what you said earlier, where you said that like your first choice is usually, you know, it's like your gut instinct tells you what's going to read and what is going to be clear. And, you know, every once in a while, obviously it's off and your editor catches you, or you like draw the wrong shirt on a character throughout I do that like so much, but
that's my one big piece of advice for anyone who wants to draw a graphic novel. Like, don't have your characters change like 6 times, because you will never remember which outfit is which and which has what pieces and like what buttons go where. Oh, fuck no. Sorry.
You tweeted that too late for me, because you tweeted that and I had just finished inking and I had inked 4 different characters and I changed their outfits in every single scene, and I saw your tweet and I was like, could you have told me that several months ago?
Well, at least you'd already done it, like already drawn it all. But yeah, there was definitely moments when we're coloring that it's like, oh no, this shirt has a collar on it.
Yeah.
Whereas like that one didn't. And so like you just keep forgetting which pieces are on what.
My favorite note so I had to have 2 people color it with me, because I had to have surgery in my deadline. So it was like we all had to get it done. And my favorite note I got back was, I got the Photoshop file back and then it just said hand ? And I just didn't draw a hand on my character. Did you have any moments like that while making it?
I mean, not that I like can think of right away, but I definitely had a ton of like little things like sometimes I would click on and off the dialogue, and then, you know, sometimes I'd forget to put it back, and then, you know, suddenly there's no dialogue on this page. And like, you know, my editor would be like, where's the dialogue, or you know, something like that. Yeah, I mean, obviously the costume bit was really tough. Oh, and there was one where somehow like one of the characters, he doesn't have a hat ever. At no point does he have a hat, but like in one panel I just drew him with a bowler hat on for like no reason. I was like, what was I thinking? Like I had no idea why I had done that. Like never at any point does he wear a hat, and I'm just like, now he has a hat for one panel.
It's like a different part of your brain. You're just working, and then it's like your brain is like, a hat.
Yeah, I mean, like we're like watching TV while we're inking so often, you know, like inking does not require 100% of your attention. So yeah, stuff happens in there all the time when you're like, wait, what? Why did I do that?
Like hand ?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is, I'm just keeping track of time. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions because that always takes longer than we think it's going to take. Before we transition to that, I guess I want to ask you if there's like one thing someone reading this book, one thing you want them to know. It could be just like a fun fact from behind the scenes, or like actually like some profound message. Like, is there something you want some reader who's watching this to know while they read it?
I don't know. I mean, I think that for me, this isn't like a big message book, but I think that like the thing I want people to take away from this is that they had a good time and that they were surprised. Like I think that I wanted to build in a really fun mystery, and I wanted people to get really pulled into that story. So I really hope that like my readers get that feeling and are, they're entertained by my book.
I am just going to piggyback off that and say you will be, because I actually have had a question that I will be asking Vicky after this, and I have not asked her ahead of time because I think it's a spoiler, but I am like dying to know about this one thing in the book. And I knew if I asked you ahead of time, I would spoil it. So I didn't ask you, but I will say like it is such a ride. You are going through this world and there's so much to pay attention to. And what I really loved is you did not make it totally clear through a lot of it what side the characters were on. So you really have to go through because you're like, I don't know about this. This is odd. And then you find out later, like, okay, phew, it's fine. But there's little bits where you're going along and I love to watch the characters interact. So your character interactions are fantastic, but also the world is so fun. So if you are looking for an action-packed ride, you will not be disappointed. With that, I want to say congratulations, Vicky, on your amazing book birthday. And I guess we'll take some questions now. So I popped open, I guess I'll just read them out loud for the people who might not see them. So someone has asked, for graphic novels in particular on the creation side, what are the biggest differences you experience between being the writer and illustrator versus being the illustrator?
I mean, this is a great question because I think both of us can actually answer this. But for me, like my first graphic novel that was published was Diana, Princess of the Amazons, which is available now. And that book was written by Shannon and Dean Hale, who are, a really amazing writers. And this is my debut as a writer. I think that the biggest difference with that is, like I said before, when you're just the illustrator, you definitely have a little bit more leeway to have forgiveness for how the book turns out, because I think people don't put as much responsibility on you when you're just the illustrator. Whereas like when you're the writer and the illustrator, then yeah, like everything is on you. Like every single choice that was made is actually like your fault, So I think that is something that very much concerned me, and in a little bit of ways it still does, but I love the fact that like I got to tell this story that I don't think anyone else would have ever told. Like this is not like a story you've heard a million times. This is like a brand new world that just I got to kind of come up with. So that is super cool in terms of being a writer. But working with Shannon and Dean, like one of the things that they taught me was really economy in terms of a script. Their book and my book are very different. Like Diana, Princess of the Amazons is very much a quiet story about friendship. And even though there's like big action-packed scenes, the way that the Hales wrote this comic was very economical in terms of what they told me to do in each panel. So I really carried that over into City of Secrets because their writing and the way that they paced the book, just even based on them just being writers, was really informative to kind of show me, oh, okay, like you don't need a lot on every page. What really matters is emotion and communication. So, I think that was a really great first learning experience.
Do you think it helped you? My question off of this, do you think it helped you prepare for City of Secrets?
I think it did. I think that the biggest thing you can do as someone who wants to do graphic novels, because these are like mighty tomes, this is a full year of work full time on a book like this. So the strongest thing you can do is actually work on smaller projects, like, 30-page comics, something like that. So you really get used to the idiom of comics and the language and thumbnailing, like the whole process. You really learn it from beginning to end. And with working on Diana, Princess of the Amazons, I got to kind of work on two aspects of the graphic novels in isolation. So I got to work on just thumbnailing and inking, and I didn't have to worry about the writing or the coloring. And just having that like small, window to really focus and hone that craft was a really, really great opportunity that I carried into City of Secrets.
Awesome.
But you should answer this question too, Lily, because I think I'm very curious about your answer.
I think sounds so odd. I'm judging myself before I even say it. I think it's easier to like projects by other people, like working on someone else's writing, because you see all the flaws in your own. So it's kind of like what you were saying. It's like you have this sole ownership. So for me, I feel like a lot more like, oh, well, you know, it is what it is with my just illustrated work. But then when it's like both of mine, you know, I'm like, this is my child. If you don't like it, I will cry, you know. But like also at the same time not. I'm also like, you don't have to like it, but it does feel so much more precious. And then I also think because of that, like I often hate it more, like working on it. You know, it's like I love working on it, and then it's like the days you're mad at it, it's like you're so mad at it.
Yeah.
So it's like you kind of flop. I always say you have to love graphic novels and making comics so much that you love them when you hate them, because you will hate them.
It's like you're gonna read your book so many times, you better love it, because I don't think I've ever read a book as many times as I've read my book. But and you know, like the flip-flopping thing is still so true. Like, you know, I read it recently and maybe a month or so ago, and yeah, like there was a time when I was like, ugh, there's things that I wish I could change. And then there's like moments when, like today when I picked it up to read it, I was like, I'm actually really happy with it. Like, and having those feelings kind of go back and forth, it's just like unending.
Don't read it ever again, because just settle on that experience.
Leave it. Move on.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, what was the hardest scene to write or draw, and which one brought you the most joy?
That's a great question. The hardest scene, I mean, the cityscapes, just because of the sheer level of detail and the fantastical nature of them, those were really difficult to draw. I mean, they weren't difficult, they were time consuming, which I think is the big difference. You know, I think that like you look at certain drawings and then they're like, oh, like this is gonna take you 6 hours to do this one drawing. And, you know, you really have to have that focus and concentration to be able to like pull that off. But, you know, I think that the rewarding feeling after of like finishing it and looking at it and being like, this kicks ass, like that is like a great joy for me. Like even like the most difficult pages are definitely ones where I'm like, this is beautiful. I'm so proud of myself, you know, like that's always been my nature, which is like, I don't lean into the things that I'm good at. I lean into the things that I'm bad at, because then when I pull it off, I'm so proud of myself. And that's the feeling I want to ride high for as long as I can.
I feel like that you've just described comics artists, because we are obviously masochists for wanting to make so much art in such a small amount of time. And my God, do we lean into stuff that we want to just be like, I can do that.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
Like I've never made more than 30 pages of a comic. I'm going to make a 300-page book. Like no one's going to stop me, you know? And then people are like, you're crazy. And you're like, shh. So that's awesome. Okay. I will say that my favorite part to read in your book was like when you would switch scenes and I knew where you were, because I felt like you did such a good job laying out the city. So really awesome. Okay, the next question is, what drew you towards towards middle grade? Do you see yourself doing YA or adult graphic novels?
That's a great question. So to middle grade, I think it's just because of this story. Like I didn't set out with writing to try to do a middle grade book. I just knew that this was the story that I wanted to tell, and then it made the most sense for the characters to be in the middle grade space. They were always that age, even in the prose version, they were always around 12, because I really wanted the friendship to be the main thrust of that relationship. And I felt like making them older kind of, you know, it complicated things in terms of who they were and what their relationship was. And the friendship was really what I wanted. So that's what really made me make this a middle grade story, even though it's quite dark. And, you know, there was a lot of people who were like, this might be older than you think it is. But I knew that I wanted my characters to be this age because of that core relationship. In terms of doing a YA or adult graphic novel, you know, my artwork is actually very versatile, which is one of the strengths of being from entertainment, is like you kind of have to fit in wherever they're going to put you. So I had a lot of different art styles that I can do. And my next series, actually after City of Secrets, is going to be a 2-book series with First Second. That's a YA book, and it's called Hungry Ghost. And Hungry Ghost is a YA contemporary, so very different than City of Secrets. And it's about a young girl struggling with an eating disorder and being Asian American. So it's very much, there's a little bit of memoir in there, and definitely very different tonally, very different art wise. It's just a completely different story, but I know that like that's a story I wanted to tell there. So for me, it's not about like I go into a project thinking, oh, I'm going to do middle grade, I'm going to do YA. I always like kind of think about the story I want to tell, and then like where does it fit in terms of the market after.
Okay, interesting. So on that, I want to ask, you mentioned it's dark, and I felt that I felt like reading it, I was surprised because you did have these scenes where it was like this character, he's a kid, and or she, I'm not going to tell you who, is like about to be murdered, and you see, you know, like the weapons, and you did not shy away of visually showing that, which I know some kids, you know, like love to read about that stuff. Did you have any pushback from your editor on that, or was there anything you felt like you had to navigate because it was middle grade and you do have like there is like a heavy darkness to some aspects of the book?
Yeah, I mean, like I always thought when I was writing the prose novel that like, oh, whenever if I sell this thing, then they're gonna have to be older, because yeah, there's so much darkness in it. It's like very violent in a lot of ways. But in the end, like we did pull back on some of the violence. Like I won't go too deep into it, but there were definitely scenes that were a little more intense than they ended up being. And I think that like it didn't take away from the fear or the stakes or anything like that. What it did was it really made it feel like these kids could escape this, because at no point do I actually give them weapons as dangerous as the villains in the story. And so for a long time, like when I was writing it, it definitely felt like they were really up against it. But then, you know, kind of toning that back, it didn't take away from how dangerous these people were, but it still kind of made it feel like they had a chance, you know? So I think that that was really important in terms of toning down some of the violence. But another thing that really surprised me was when I was writing it, you know, I wrote it with with more violence in it, and it didn't bother me as much. You know, like I love Neil Gaiman's books, and Graveyard Book is a huge influence on this, and it starts with like a murderer coming into a baby's house, you know, literally trying to kill a baby. So I was like, it's okay in middle grade. But then like when I started to draw it, I started actually starting to feel like, oh, okay, yeah, this is actually making me uncomfortable. So I do think that there is something about it being graphic and being visual that I did have to tone it down. And it wasn't because of pushback, it was actually also on my end, because I was like, oh yeah, like that doesn't feel good. Like that actually does make me feel really different when I'm illustrating it and seeing it visually, as opposed to just like hearing about it, you know, described.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it was like I was actually taken aback only because I don't tend to read super violent books. So I was like reading it and I was like, oh whoa. And then but it accurately sets the stakes, right? Without it, you would not feel the pressure that you do when reading the book. Okay, awesome. I think we're all out of time. So I want to have you plug what you're currently working on.
Yeah,
you mentioned it briefly, but in the next book.
Yeah. So obviously City of Secrets is out in stores everywhere today. Also the book I Kissed Alice, which I did the illustrations for, which is actually about making comics, and 2 very cute girls, Sapphic Love, Enemies to Lovers, very cool. Love that book too. So those 2 books are out in stores now. And I'm currently working on the sequel for City of Secrets, and that should be out in July of 2021.
Oh my goodness, you are on such a tight turnaround schedule. I'm so impressed.
Yay, so many impressive things. Well, I am hopping back on again to say thank you so much, Lily, for being an amazing host and moderator, and also for sharing your awesome work with us as well, like Menstruation Revolution. Heck yeah. And Victoria, thank you so much for celebrating your book birthday and both of your book babies that are out in the world today. Don't forget, everyone, You can get these awesome books at the link. And that is it for tonight. We're going to say thank you so much for attending, your comments, your questions, and your love. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Thanks, guys.